PowerPoint in 1 minute. I shall share it. But even as I do that, I can answer the question that was asked, which is with regards to if you've not been paid from August, what's the proper channel for exiting the premise and they still have your license? So I think the first question I normally have over there, definitely, as Chris said, I think this maybe is something that you need to come and sit down with an advocate and maybe give us more context of the type of relationship that you have with the person who's not paid you. Are they your employer? Are you a contractor? Or are you there as a consultant? What exactly is the nature of relationship? Because then it will also determine how we are going to handle that non-payment. But definitely, I think essentially, as Chris said, you need to seek a way to sorry, I think, can everybody see my application? You need to seek a way to get paid and to get back your license. And short of them complying with a court order, the next step would be, short of them complying with a demand letter, the next step would be for them to be taken to court and to be issued with a court order. So today, I know Chris has given me 20 minutes. I find that very difficult sometimes when I'm talking about data, but I shall try to keep within the 20 minutes. I'm also cognizant of the time. It is 8:30, so that I can take you through this brief, I'd say, introductory training to what data protection is. Because I am not sure about where we all are when it comes to, understanding data protection, I've opted to give a bit of a background. And the first thing that we need to understand about data protection is that privacy is actually a fundamental right and it's guaranteed by our Constitution. Beyond the Constitution, we also have the Data Protection Act of 2019, and that's our main governing act when it comes to data protection. And it is the primary law that gives personal data, that protects personal data and gives individuals enforceable rights over over their information. We also have ODPC guidance notes. So while they are not necessarily law, what they act to do, what they help us do is understand how we are supposed to implement the Data Protection Act. And in fact, you'll find that the ODCP has guidance notes for different industries. And I think there's one for the health industry. There's a guidance note for the health industry. And what happens with that is just to help us understand the different things that people in that specific sector need to do for them to be compliant with the Act. So I normally start at asking ourselves, what is privacy? And to be honest, privacy is very difficult to define because it has very many components. You can have a teenage child who says, "Get out of my room. I need my privacy. Don't look at my phone. I need my privacy." So privacy has very many different components and very many things to think about. So the first thing is that it's the right to be let alone. And that just basically means do not disturb me or my personal information. If I do not want you to know, you should not know. You do not need to seek to seek any information about me that I do not allow you to know. Secondly, related to that is limited access to self. So I have a right and you have a right to determine how much and what information I want to share and with whom I want to share. There's secrecy, meaning that there is information all of us in our lives want to keep secret or is considered private. And I think in this space, in the pharmaceutical space, in the pharmaceutical industry, and in the medical space, that is very true, that there's a lot of information that you may come across that people consider secret or private and do not want the world to know. And then there's also individuals' dignity and autonomy, your personhood, because again, even with the type of data that you hold and you process every single day, that any breach of that data could come and damage someone's dignity and their autonomy. Where if that data becomes public, they could feel that they have lost their sense of dignity, and people now know something about them that they did not want them to know. Yeah, so data privacy, it just deals with the individual's ability to choose the flow of personal information, how it can be used, and who has access to it. And information privacy deals with the rules, which is now what we're going to look and dive into, the rules around the collection and processing of personal information. So If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and I will get to them. I know I am talking quickly, but it's because I feel like I have a lot to say and I want to do it in the period of time that I have been given. So the first thing we need to know about data protection is that there are certain key principles. And these key principles just help us lay the land. And I'll go through them quickly. I will share this slide so that you can be able to get more context. So the first is to understand what information does the Data Protection Act cover. And this is personal information. So any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person. So what that means is that any information that if I said certain things, you knew you're talking about me. So for example, let me use Chris as an example. If I just told you, oh, this is a strategy expert, you may or may not know. There are many people who are strategy experts, yeah. But if I start telling you the strategy expert, he works in this company. The company is located in this building. The building is on this specific location. And then I can tell you his name, and maybe, I would have pretty much identified who I am talking about, even if I may not tell you the name of the person. So it is any data that is capable of identifying a natural person. And that data can be anything. It can be my address, who's capable of identifying me. It can be my phone number, which can be used again with just a bit of few steps. You can know my name, you know. It's my ID number. So any data that's capable of identifying a natural person. And of course, it does not cover any corporate persons, but it does only covers people. So there's the other term that you'll hear a lot, which is processing. And processing just means anything that you're going to do with the data. So whether you're collecting it, whether you're recording it, whether you're storing it, organizing it, retrieving it, consulting. So just think about the systems that you're using. If you need to pull up from the hospital system, for example, a particular prescription. So that process of, getting into the system and picking up that data is still part of processing. So anything that you do with data is considered processing. The other thing you'll hear a lot about is data subject rights. And I'll spend a bit of time here because these are the key things that you need to consider when you are handling personal data. So the first is the right to be informed why their personal data is being collected and what it shall be used for. So this information is key. That means that at any given point in time, if you're collecting data, for a particular reason, that data subject ought to be informed of why it's being collected and what you're going to use the data for. And maybe I can just think about, I know Chris had touched on delivery, yeah, for example. So if I have a pharmacy which delivers medication to a person, to someone's home, then I am collecting their data for their location data. The person whose medication is being delivered needs to understand that the reason why I am collecting this data is for me to be able to finalize the contract that we have. So part of the contract is for me to deliver the medicine to your home. So I need this data for that purpose. However, if you're collecting the data for you to start a loyalty program, you need to inform them and get their consent that this is what the data is for. It's for a loyalty program. The second thing is that data subjects have the right to their personal data. So you can never deny a data subject their personal data. If I come and say, I left a prescription here 3 weeks ago, can you please retrieve it for me? It's my personal data. It's something pertaining to me, then I have the right to that. They have the right to object to the processing of all or part of their personal data. So regardless, if I have given you consent prior, I can then come back and say, I don't like how you're handling my data. So if I've given my phone number for the purpose of making a payment, for example, and then you're able to take that phone number. I know this used to happen a while back. You're able to take that phone number and now start sending me messages and telling me, oh, please come back. We have offers for you or whatever. I have the right to tell you, actually, no, you should not be processing my data. Even if I had ticked a box saying, yes, you can send me promotional material at any period of time, as long as the data is mine, I'm able to say, please stop processing my data. I have the right to correct false or misleading data, which of course can be very, very important in the case of medication and prescriptions and illnesses. So being able to correct that false or misleading data, especially where decisions are going to be made on that data, and to delete false or misleading data about them. But even beyond deleting false or misleading data, data subjects also have the right to deletion. They can have the right to be forgotten. They can actually come in and say, do not forget who I am. Do not process my data anymore, and you need to delete it and delete it from your systems, and you should never process my data again. And that is a right that they have that you must comply with. So the second key thing that we need to understand when it comes to data protection, it's like a dual system. The first system is dealing with the rights. Yeah. So the rights are what rights do you have as an individual, as a data subject? The second system is dealing with the principles. So at any time you're handling data, you need to be cognizant of the rights and you need to be cognizant of the principles. Both of those things have to be in existence. Now, when you're processing, when you're thinking about principles, you don't have to satisfy 100% of the principles. You don't have to check all of them, but you must be able to identify what process I am doing with the data, what principle allows me to do that, and which data subject rights am I safeguarding. So the first principle is lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. And this just basically means that there has to be a valid legal basis for collecting and using the data. The personal data must not be used in ways that are unexpected, misleading, harmful, meaning that at the end of the day, if I have given you my data, I do not expect to be called by another pharmacist because you sold my data to them. So you cannot use my data in a way that is I did not anticipate my data shall be used. And then you need to be inform all data subjects on the purpose of the collection, the identity of the controller, and their rights regarding the data. Now, as pharmacists, a lot of times you'll have a dual role of being both a data controller and a data processor. A controller is the person who owns the data, and the processor is the person who does something, who analyzes or does something to the data on behalf of the controller. So for example, if you're in a hospital setup, the controller perhaps is the hospital, and you as a pharmacist would be considered a processor. So the second principle is purpose limitation. So you should only collect data for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes. I think that is very clear. That is very clear. Anytime you go to collect data, it needs to be for a specific and very clear and legitimate purpose. Do not collect more data than what you ought to collect. So I don't know that you guys remember this when we were like in the 2000s and 2010s, before the Data Protection Act came into place, people would give you a form to fill in, and you're even being asked to fill in about, your spouse, your children, and people would collect a lot of data and just tell you, no, just fill in this form. I need you to fill in this form for me to give you the services. And in that form, you're being asked for information that is completely irrelevant to the service that you're getting. So this purpose limitation is coming to curb that and say you can only ask for the data that you need. That means as a data controller, you need to ask yourself, what information do I actually need for me to undertake this service? So for example, if I'm a pharmacist, I just need the prescription, I need the name of the doctor, I need the name of the patient, I might need their age because of dosage or something of the sort. I might need their sex, whether they're female or male, because of dosage or whatever reason around that. So you can only ask for that specific data, and any data that is over and above that, you should not ask for it. So think to your forms, if you have any data collection forms, go back to them and ask yourself, what data do I need here and what data don't I need? So the third one is data minimization. Again, collect the minimum amount of personal data for the intended purpose. So you've already limited the purpose and then now you minimize the data. So how much, even if I need to know about your location, what do I need to know about that location? I might not need to know up to sub-county level. I might not need to know your home, your mother's home, alternate areas of delivery or something like that. So you just need to think, I've limited my purpose, and then now I minimize the data I'm collecting. Data has to be accurate because if it's not accurate, um, it can lead to the infringement of data subject rights. And so anything that is inaccurate or outdated needs to be corrected or deleted. That means as data controllers and processors, this law requires you to actually audit your data and consider whether or not you have the correct information. So a big place where we normally have inaccurate data is, let's say, phone numbers. So today I've come to you and maybe I signed a form and I put in my phone number, but over the years my phone number changes. And you have been sending messages to me thinking thinking to my number, thinking that it's still me, but perhaps you're sending messages to somebody else who has now gotten my number. So that type of information, you need to make sure that you are correcting the data as quickly as possible. As soon as you find out that you have the wrong data, that you are able to correct or delete. Then storage limitation. That means you should not store data for longer than you require. I think in practice, sometimes people can even keep data for 20 years, 30 years. They have it stored somewhere in boxes or in their computer systems. However, the issue with that is obviously you can have data that is no longer valid or inaccurate, or on the other hand, you also increase the likelihood of breach or of that data becoming public. So storage limitation means that you need to establish your own data retention policies and determine either by law or by your own organization, how long is it that I should keep this data? So for example, if a particular patient has not, or a particular person has not come to you for the last 5 to 7 years, is there a reason why you need to keep their phone number in your system? Yeah, or their phone or their names in your system. So you need to think around, or their prescription in your system if you record those prescriptions. So you need to think around, how long do I need to keep this data? And then integrity and confidentiality. I think this is something that even all pharmacists understand and know, because this is one of the cornerstones of how medical professionals shall use data. The only thing is thinking that there's an extra step around security measures, meaning that in as much as you yourself, you have the integrity and confidentiality, you also need to think about what systems do I need to put in place to make sure that my data and the data that I'm holding is secure and that it cannot be accessed by people who should not have access. So beyond the practical part of, beyond just saying, this is part of what we do as medical professionals, the next step is to think about how do you practically do it to ensure that there's that integrity and confidentiality. And then finally, accountability. And this just means that all organizations, this is very key, all organizations will be held accountable if they fail to comply with the data protection laws. That is non-negotiable. If today, and it doesn't matter if it's your employee who releases the information or misuses the data for a particular patient, you as the organization shall be held accountable. So that accountability principle means that where you are running a business, the law has then placed um, that that it's now your business that needs to comply. And if you fail to comply, then you shall be held accountable. And if your employees fail to comply, then they shall be held accountable. And if you are hacked because you had bad security systems, yeah, then also you shall be held accountable. Of course, the severity of what that accountability is may differ, but essentially it is you, the organization, that is going to be held accountable. So Section 46 of the Data Protection Act provides for the lawful basis of processing health data. And it says that personal data relating to the health of a data subject may only be processed, number one, by or under the responsibility of a healthcare provider or by a person subject to the obligation of professional secrecy under any law. So I think now you need to ask yourself, in terms of your employees, who has access to the data, to the personal data of the patients who come to you, or of any data subject who comes to you. Who has access to that data? Because Section 46 says only the responsibility of a healthcare provider or a person who is subject to the obligation of professional secrecy under any law. So it's very restrictive about who can handle personal data, and you need to then go back and audit who then has access to that data. So for example, if you've hired maybe a clerk or someone who is assisting the pharmacist, should they have access to the personal data? And yeah, should they have access to that personal data? Should they be able to process that personal data? So we look at best practices. So this is just thinking about what are those lawful bases for pharmacies. Where can you say the reason why I process data is because? That's what lawful basis means. Sorry, it just means I process this data for this particular reason. So the first one is compliance with the legal obligation. And this just basically means that I am legally obligated to dispense prescriptions and to maintain patient medical records. And that's a legal requirement and a professional requirement, such that you might not need to seek for consent. Sorry, you might not seek consent each and every time someone comes with a prescription and asks you to fill in that prescription. Yeah. Or comes and asks, oh, I need medication, and you ask them some personal information. Or they use an app that you have where they request for medication to be sent to them. So that is usually around compliance with a legal obligation. And also, we also have compliance with a contractual obligation, which means that at the end of the day, I as the patient, if I come to your pharmacy and I need you to fill in a prescription, I cannot then object to you processing my data. You need to process my personal data for you to fill in the prescription. So that then becomes part of the contractual engagement that we are in. If I do not allow you to process my data, you cannot do your part of filling in that prescription. So that gives us a very broad space where you can handle data that without necessarily having formal consent from a patient, because you have that legal obligation or contractual obligation. However, again, whenever you do anything within saying I'm doing compliance with a legal obligation or contractual obligation, you need to go back to your principles and identify in those principles that you are actually in alignment with them. So just because I can do it for a legal obligation doesn't mean that now I come and ask for even more data than I need. And it doesn't mean that now I can process your data in ways that should not be processed. This allowance of compliance with the legal obligation is simply there to allow you to process data without needing to ask someone for consent every single time, because at some point it becomes an impossibility. However, you still have to do it within the principles that we talked about, and you still have to do it in a way that protects the data subject rights. So again, that duality that I was talking about. The second one is consent, and consent has to be express, unequivocal, free, specific. That means that when I'm giving consent, as a data subject, I have to say, yes, I consent. So think about a situation where maybe you've created an app for delivering medication. So I know we have My Dawa, let's say like the My Dawa app, yeah. And for me, I have to give my consent for my data to be processed in that app. Why? Because there's a lot of data that I have given that has nothing to do with getting my prescription filled, including my location data. So anything that goes over and above that legal obligation, you ought to ask for consent from the data subject. Protection of vital interests. Of course, we know that sometimes the data, when you're processing data, you might be compelled by law to disclose that data to officials, to official channels. Yeah. So I'm thinking in terms of epidemics. So there's certain data that you must disclose by law, and you are required to disclose by law for the sake of public interest or vital interest. Yeah. Meaning that because you're in the health sector, you are allowed to have certain disclosures where it is necessary to protect the public. So the key compliance obligations, number one is registration and governance. I'm so happy to see that 25% of the people who filled in the survey have registered, and the other 75%, the registration is mandatory. But do not fear, it is not a very expensive process to undergo. So I think it's like 4,000 shillings. If you're in the SME space, it will be about 4,000 shillings. So pharmacists do not fall under the exception of you must be doing the 5 million annual turnover for you to register. You are actually under mandatory registration. So you need to register because of the type of data you're handling. You're handling sensitive data. And I saw someone asking a question that, mentioning that insurance companies had asked for the registration certificate, and that is part of why, because now it's a mandatory registration, mandatory compliance. So you may, depending on the size of the pharmacy, whether you're a conglomerate, whether you have many branches, you may need to designate a DPO. And a DPO is just someone who has expert knowledge and in data protection and practices, and it could be an employee. So that DPO is the person who's going to help you make decisions when it comes to data. The other thing is doing a DPIA, which is a data protection impact assessment. And this is important, especially where you are carrying out a process that will result in high risk to the rights and freedoms of individuals. So a good example of when you need to do a DPIA is, let's say you've come up with an innovative application, mobile app. And in that mobile app, you're going to be collecting data and processing health data for the patient. So maybe prescription data or whatever. And that's what is giving you a competitive edge. So before you take this mobile app into the public, you need to do a data protection impact assessment. And this is basically a risk assessment. I think, okay, my sister is a doctor, so I've seen them doing a lot of risk assessments, and there are certain things that even in pharmacists, in the pharmaceutical industry, there are certain assessments that you need to undertake to ensure that you're protecting the rights of the individuals who you're dealing with. So this is similar to that. And it's just a risk assessment coming in to say, if we collect this data and if we use it how we want to use it, what are the risks that may be there for the data subjects, and how do we mitigate those risks? So this is especially where you are it's not mandatory, but it will be mandatory if you're processing a lot of data and it has high risk to the rights and freedoms of the individuals. The second compliance obligation is managing data subject rights, and this is usually done through processes and procedures. Now, Chris has talked about the need of implementing SOPs. So we have SOPs in data protection. They are there. And it's important for you to have SOPs when it comes to data protection and have a set way of handling data subject requests. I will tell you, I did a study of all the cases. It was up to, I think, July this year that ODPC had issued a ruling on. That's the Office of Data Protection. Commissioner. The ODPC found, my study found that majority, like 90% of the fines and of all the fines were issued to companies that did not protect data subject rights. And most of them were around consent. And consent management is one of the easiest rights for you to make sure that you're compliant with. So that means that in as much as you've gone and registered, if you do not come and have, if you do not implement clear procedures to facilitate those rights, then you're likely to be found to have breached data subject rights. So for example, think about what's my procedure if someone comes and says, in the unlikely event, you need to delete my data. What process will we go through to delete that data? In the unlikely event, someone comes and says, you need to rectify my data. What process do we undertake to actually rectify that data for that client? So those processes have to be part of your SOP. Then the other thing is now data security and breach management. So you must implement technical and organizational measures to protect patient data. As I said, the last principle, accountability, means that if you fail to do this, you are the one to be held accountable. So the principle is data protection by design and by default, meaning that if I have systems, they need to be protecting, not by default, sorry, they need to be protecting data immediately. Um, immediately I am looking at someone's data, immediately I am handling data, I have to have systems that are designed to protect the personal data. And then the second thing is on breach notification. So for breach notification, you need to make sure that if the event there's a personal data breach, that you notify the ODPC within 72 hours of becoming aware. So it's a very short period of time. Now, sometimes when we talk about data security and breach management, we think that it's like a hacker has come, taken over our systems. And while that might happen, it's a rare occurrence. Actually, majority of the data security breaches that we see in this space happen through staff members. So how your staff members are handling the data that they have access to. So are your staff members selling data? Are your staff members, are they calling people? I know like Aga Khan had an issue where, and I think it was a pharmacist, someone had gone to fill in their prescription in Aga Khan, and then the pharmacist talked to them. And then after they had talked to them, they called them later on, which is a breach of their personal data. So a lot of times, beyond thinking about the very heavy technical aspects, you also think about your staff and how do I need to train my staff to make sure that they are handling data in the appropriate manner. So best practices, I'm almost done. So best practices, number one is staff training and awareness. You must consistently train your staff members. I think it would be great. I understand the struggle with SMEs where you're maybe training 2 or 3 staff members, but I think it would be great if, let's say, the PSK gets all staff members to come in for global staff training and awareness, just for people to understand the importance of data protection and how to be compliant with data protection. The second, of course, is physical and digital security. So where do you keep your records? Where do you keep your physical records? Are they kept in the room at the back on a desk, or are they kept in a desk which is closed, or are they kept in a filing cabinet which is closed? And then digital security. Do you have strong passwords? Do you have multi-factor authentication? Do you have one password for everybody in the office? Because that also happens, that, we have one master password, anybody can log into the system. Or do you have passwords for each individual person? So I think it's important for you to think about it in that way. And then the third is vendor and third-party management. And I think this is also where the question around insurance company comes in, because they are third parties. You need to understand how is the insurance company handling the data that you're using. So for example, when you're making claims from the insurance company, what data do they require? What are their systems? And while it might be difficult to ask them for proof of compliance, it's also possible for you to say, well, we need to conduct a semi-due diligence. I think a lot of times, even within the industry, you already know the people who are compliant and those who are not compliant, and then thinking around beyond just the, let's say, heavy corporate businesses like insurance companies, any other vendor that you have who handles personal data for you, how are they managing their systems? How compliant are they with the Data Protection Act? So I've touched on some of these contemporary issues. One of them is delivery of prescriptions. As Chris said, sometimes we need to be more competitive in the market that we're in. And you may think of going down the option of, delivering prescriptions to people's homes. Yeah. So the ease of access. Um, but you need to think about there are several issues you need to think about when it comes to delivery of prescriptions. A lot of them is how do you handle the data that you get? There's a case. Let me just show you the case. The case is against Malibu Pharmacy. And in this case, the complainant basically, Malibu Pharmacy was sent a rider with the medication. Yeah, with the prescribed medication, and on that, on top of the package, they had written the name, phone number, house location, type of prescription, and a wrong diagnosis. Yeah, which was readable, open for anybody to see. So the particular complainant went to the ODPC and they had a hearing and she was given compensation. They were ordered to pay her compensation of 700,000 and then they were issued for an enforcement notice. So that type of compensation you're seeing of 700,000, that is a standard compensation for anybody who's handling sensitive personal data. So normally in the trend has been with regards to schools, with hospitals and pharmacists, because you're handling sensitive personal data, the compensation that you will be asked to pay the data subject is between 700. I think I saw one which went up to um, I think there was one which was egregious. It went up to 1.2. So from 700,000 and above is the type of compensation you'll be asked to pay. So the other type of contemporary issue is, let's say, loyalty programs. So when I have a loyalty program and I want to ask people to give me their phone numbers and their email addresses and their names so that I can be giving them points each time they come and purchase. Um, uh, medicine from my pharmacy. So again, with that loyalty program, it's just one of the key issues you normally ask yourself is where the data for loyalty programs is kept. Is it kept in the same place where the data for prescriptions is kept? That means if someone was to access the data for loyalty programs, are they able to know what illness or what diagnosis a particular person has? So the importance of like just one quick tip is the importance of keeping such data separate so that you're not able to identify each other. The other one is mobile apps. Again, as I've talked about it, what data are you collecting when you're when you want to create a mobile app for the sake of delivery of medication? How do you store that data? Again, is there a way to segregate the data that you have on the mobile app for delivery from the data concerning the person's diagnosis? Yeah, so it's key because then the diagnosis becomes the more sensitive data that you want to not be identifiable. Yeah, and then again, different systems and IT systems that you may have, hospital systems or point of sale systems. How do you manage the data that is going into that? I know in the healthcare system, a lot of times information is anonymized and pseudonymized. And so that's a very, 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 very good practice for you to have within your own systems, that you have anonymization and pseudonymization. That word is very difficult for me to say. Yeah. And finally, what if you breach the Data Protection Act? What are the consequences? So the first one is enforcement notice. And an enforcement notice basically it's like a soft landing from the ODPC. And what it comes to say is that I don't know whether I have gone way over my time, not so much, but basically an enforcement notice comes and says that how it notes how the organization is to comply with the law, the timeline of compliance, and the consequence of non-compliance. So, for example, if you get an enforcement notice, you'll be told you failed to do this. You need to comply with the law in this specific way, and you need to comply within this particular time, and they will come back and check. And if you don't comply, the fines that ODPC can give you is up to 5 million Kenya shillings, a general penalty of a fine up to 3 million, or imprisonment of up to 10 million or both. Yeah. An order of compensation, forfeiture of equipment, or a court order for preserving protection of personal data. So it's important for you to, like, especially if you ever receive an enforcement notice, take it as the ODPC is telling you how to comply and just take the steps to make sure that you are compliant. If you do not take those steps, then the consequences of non-compliance is usually the fine of up to 5 million shillings. So I've seen there are some questions that I need to um yeah, that I need to answer. Okay, so I think this is from Mora. When the client wants to retrieve the information, for example, prescription, or request the data to be deleted, what happens with the information that is required to be retained by law? For example, controlled drugs. Are we issuing copies to the client but retain the data? So normally what happens is if you are required by law to retain the data, then you can retain the data on that basis, but you can inform them that I have deleted all this other data, but I have to retain this particular data because I am required by law to retain that data. Because obviously, nobody wants you to comply with one law and break the other. So you just need to notify them that I have deleted all the data that I can delete, and that which I'm unable to delete because of legal compliance. Then we shall, yeah. Then I need to keep I need to keep that information. So we shouldn't fill in our homes in bank forms. Yeah, so in fact, that's a good question. When you go to the bank, why does the bank need to know where you live? A lot of times it's based on KYC, they know your client and anti-money laundering rules. But perhaps that is something that you need to ask, why do I need to give you the the my place of work? Why do I need to give you my place of residence? I'm so sorry, Henry. I know I have taken long. Yeah, do apologize. Um, Margaret is asking, kindly talk about M-Pesa prompts on members of one WhatsApp group. Where could the data breach be coming from? So M-Pesa prompts on members of one WhatsApp group. So I'm assuming here that in a WhatsApp group, members started getting M-Pesa prompts to put in their PIN. So usually that data breach is coming from within. Human beings are the weakest link when it comes to data. They are the weakest link. So you might find that someone has either you've been infiltrated into the group by a member who is there to do nefarious actions. You need to audit who the members are, or someone has access to the numbers in the WhatsApp group. Yeah. So usually that breach is either internal, a member who has breached, or someone has been able to infiltrate into the group and they're not supposed to be there. I agree. This can be a webinar on its own. Yeah, this issue is with the police. We have open WhatsApp groups and many areas of access data leaks. So someone took the data and is using it to send prompts. Yeah, so I think I've answered there. So do these requirements apply to wholesale businesses? So Vaishali, I think usually it depends on the data that you're handling and if you're meeting the threshold. So if you are, as a wholesale business, I am assuming you're not handling prescriptions. You're just meeting the the orders of the retail pharmacists. So now you go back and ask yourself if you meet the threshold of 5 million annual, uh, if you meet the threshold of 5 million annual turnover. So if you meet that threshold of 5 million annual turnover, then you need to register. Secondly, if you have, I think, more than 10 employees, then you need to register. So you need to check if you meet one of those two requirements. I will share, okay, Chris has given my email address, but I'll also share my contacts right here for anybody who needs to see. I think, I hope I have answered everybody's questions. I know we have gone quite a long while. Yeah, I'm seeing one last question on the open one of lawyer, how enforceable are non-compete clauses. Allow me to type in the answer as I hand over back to Chris.
Wow, this indeed should have been a webinar all by itself, all on its own. Yeah, I agree. It should have been a webinar on its own. So I will not. Angela, if you can stop sharing your screen, then I can share mine. Thank you. I will not take any more time than is necessary because, ladies and gentlemen, we have learned a lot. We have learned a lot. So if you want to reach either Angela or myself, please, those are our numbers, those are our email addresses. Um, Please feel free to hit us on the inbox and we shall arrange. At the sandbox, the first meeting, which is called a discovery call, is always free. That is when we get to know you, we get to know your business, and we get to know how we can support you. This meeting can be virtual or can be in person. You're very welcome to visit us and talk to us. Our partnership with PSK is very precious and important to us, and because of that, you will have very good reception. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Let me pass this back to Dr. Hezron. And as I do that, let me tell you this. Compliance is the highway to success. It is not a speed bump. If you want to build a big business, if you want to grow and scale to new heights and expand to international markets, then embrace compliance and you shall be able to achieve the success that you deserve. Thank you very much. I believe the recording will be shared, but now over to you, Dr. Hezron.
All right. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, Angela. That was a very amazing and informative session. And I'm still seeing that there are people who are still requesting if this can be a series of webinar. So I'm sure we're going to plan for more. I think this was a lot of information to put together in one session. But we really appreciate the two of you for just that insightful presentation. So members, I think because of time, we'll just be closing as soon as possible. I see Chris and Angela have already shared their contacts. If you have any queries, please feel free to reach out to them. And I don't know, our president, Dr. Wairimu, do you have any final remarks before we close?
Good evening. Mine is to say thank you. Members are asking whether we can have more CPD points for this one because it has been one which is highly informative. But I think, as I said earlier, our goal is to ensure that our members, in addition to the clinical efficiency, that whatever business that they are engaged in, that it will have some form of also business efficiency. So it is very intentional. If there's any feedback you can give us on this, on topics that you'd need to make this better, we are open to, just engaging with the teams to ensure that we're meeting the members' needs. For me, to the speakers, Chris and Advocate Angela, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your presence. I feel that we will need to have a specific data, a data webinar, just to make sure that it's a fresh webinars, just to make sure that people are able to become compliant, because that's what we need to do. I know I had put Dr. Hezron to task to also do a feedback form. So I know he'll be sending that out so that we are able now to also see where the needs are. But other than that, thank you so much for engaging. Thank you so much. This was very informative. And I know this is not the last time we are seeing this team. Yeah, so thank you even for staying until this time.
All right. Thank
Over
you.
to
Thank you
you,
so much.
Pez. Yes.
Right, thank you so much, President, for those remarks. So I think this is where we'll close, and just please note that the event is not on the PPB portal yet. So we're going to notify you once it's already listed. And also just to notify you that we'll be having we'll be having dinner for Nairobi branch in partnership with the national office. So for those who are in the Nairobi branch and would like to attend, kindly be on the lookout for that. The deadline for the early bird is 5th of December. So I think at this point we'll just close. Thank you so much for joining and for staying up to this late. We'll be able to share the recording with you, so be on the lookout for that. Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you.